Have you ever tried to get online from somewhere really remote? Like picture yourself deep in the woods or, miles from the nearest town,
Oh, yeah.
streaming your favorite show out there. Probably feels like a distant dream, right?
It did feel impossible not too long ago.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore today. Starlink. Elon Musk's ambitious project to beam the internet down from space using a whole network of satellites. We'll be looking at a couple of YouTube videos for this deep dive, one from Insane Curiosity and another from Branch Education, and we'll also touch on a news segment from India Today. It's really a crash course in how this futuristic technology is changing the game for people all over the globe.
It's really tackling a huge issue, the digital divide. Insane Curiosity points out that almost half the world still can't get online.
Yeah, and it's not like it's easy to run fiber optic cables through jungles and mountains. I
Right.
mean, those traditional internet solutions get pretty complicated and expensive fast.
Yeah, they do. And that's where Starlink's approach gets really interesting. Instead of relying on those physical cables, they're using what they call a mega constellation of thousands of small satellites, and they orbit much closer to Earth than traditional communication satellites.
So closer satellites means faster speeds. Got it. And Branch Education emphasized how important that low latency is.
Right, absolutely.
I guess nobody wants a laggy video call or to get, disconnected in the middle of an online game.
Exactly.
But how does the data actually travel through this, space-based internet system?
Well, Insane Curiosity breaks it down pretty well. The data travels from ground stations up to those Starlink satellites. And then the satellites beam it back down to those user terminals that they nicknamed. And this is the best part. Dishy McFlatface.
Dishy McFlatface. I love that they gave it a nickname. It definitely makes it more relatable. But what makes these dishes so special?
Well, they're not your average satellite dish. Branch Education goes into detail about how they use a phased array antenna. Imagine a grid of tiny antennas all working together to create one powerful, steerable beam that can track the satellites as they move across the sky.
Hold on, how fast are these satellites actually moving?
Well, they travel at a dizzying 27,000 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, that's like traveling from New York to Los Angeles in about 8 minutes.
Wow, that's incredible. And to think Dishy has to constantly switch between satellites as they're whizzing by overhead just to maintain a stable connection.
That's right. And to handle all that data, they use a complex encoding technique called quadrature amplitude modulation, or 64 QAM for short. It's basically a way of squeezing more information into the signal by varying both the amplitude and the phase, kind of like writing a message in code, but with radio waves.
So that's how they achieve those super fast speeds we keep hearing about.
That's it.
Branch Education mentions speeds of hundreds of megabits per second. Isn't that enough to stream multiple HD movies at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where things start to get really interesting, especially when you consider what India Today highlighted. Starlink's potential to connect those remote communities in India. Think about villages that have never, ever had access to high-speed internet before. Suddenly, they're able to tap into a wealth of information and resources.
It's really amazing to think about the possibilities, isn't it? But we also need to be realistic. There have to be some drawbacks to relying on space-based internet, don't you think?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Like any new technology, Starlink has its challenges.
Yeah.
And those are definitely worth exploring further.
All right, we'll dive into those in just a bit.
It's good.
So we've talked about how revolutionary Starlink could be, but what about the other side of the coin? What are the potential downsides we need to consider?
Well, yeah, you're right. It's crucial to look at the whole picture. One major hurdle, especially in places like India, as India Today pointed out, is navigating all the regulations. Governments have a lot of concerns about security and data privacy, not to mention potential interference with existing telecom networks.
Makes sense. You can't just launch thousands of satellites without dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Oh, you can't.
But what about those existing telecom companies? I imagine they're not exactly thrilled about this new competition.
Yeah, India Today touched on that as well. These companies have poured a lot of resources into their ground-based networks, and Starlink could definitely disrupt their business models. It's like the age-old story of, innovation clashing with established players.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
But speaking of potential disruptions, I can't help but think about the sheer number of satellites involved. Insane Curiosity mentioned Starlink's goal of having up to 40,000 satellites in orbit. Isn't that a bit crowded?
That's a valid concern for sure. With that many objects zipping around in low Earth orbit, the risk of space debris becomes a real issue. Imagine those defunct satellites colliding with each other, creating a chain reaction of crashes. It could make space travel a lot more dangerous, not to mention the potential impact on scientific research. It's like a cosmic traffic jam with some pretty high stakes. Are there any solutions being explored to prevent that kind of disaster?
There are a few ideas on the table. Some companies are developing technologies to actively remove space debris, almost like a cosmic garbage truck. Others are focusing on designing satellites that can deorbit themselves at the end of their lifespan, essentially burning up harmlessly in the atmosphere.
Okay, so it sounds like we need to be really proactive about managing this whole space-based infrastructure. But it's not just about what's happening up in orbit, right? India Today also mentioned concerns about light pollution.
Right. Astronomers are worried that all those shiny satellites reflecting sunlight could interfere with their observations of the night sky. It's like trying to stargaze with a bunch of disco balls flashing in your face. It could potentially hinder our ability to study the universe and make new discoveries.
It's a shame to think that our quest to connect everyone to the internet could have unintended consequences for scientific exploration. It feels like we're constantly facing these tough choices,
Uh,
weighing the benefits of progress against the potential downsides.
Absolutely. Finding that balance is crucial. But the conversation around Starlink also brings up a really interesting point that Insane Curiosity touched on. The fact that Starlink isn't alone in this game. There are other companies like OneWeb and Amazon's Project Kuiper that are also launching their own satellite internet constellations.
So it's becoming a bit of a space race, but this time it's about who can provide internet access to the most remote corners of the world.
In a way, yes. And while competition can sometimes lead to faster innovation and lower prices for consumers, it also raises questions about how we manage this emerging space-based internet infrastructure responsibly.
It seems like there's a lot to consider beyond just the technology itself. We need to be thinking about the ethical and environmental implications as well. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about what this all means for the average person. Why should someone who's never even thought about using satellite internet care about any of this?
That's a great question.
We've covered a lot of ground, from how Starlink's technology works to some of the potential downsides of having, a sky full of satellites. But now I'm curious, why should all of this matter to the average person? Is this just a cool tech story, or is there something more to it?
It definitely goes beyond just faster internet speeds. Think about it. Starlink could fundamentally change how we think about connectivity. It has the potential to make information and resources accessible to everyone no matter where they live.
So it's about more than just technology, it's about creating a more equitable world.
Exactly. India Today brought up a really compelling example. The impact Starlink could have on education. Imagine students in remote villages suddenly being able to access the same online learning resources as kids in big cities.
That could be huge for breaking cycles of poverty and giving everyone a chance to reach their full potential. But are there any concerns about, making sure these resources are truly accessible and affordable for underprivileged communities?
That's a crucial point. Technology alone isn't enough. We also need to address those social and economic barriers that prevent people from taking advantage of these opportunities.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do on that front. But shifting gears a bit, what about healthcare? I remember India Today mentioned telemedicine as a potential game changer.
Absolutely. Think about doctors being able to consult with patients, remotely provide diagnoses, even monitor vital signs in real time, regardless of location. It could revolutionize healthcare in areas where access to medical professionals is limited.
It's almost like having a doctor in your pocket no matter where you are in the world. That could be life-changing for so many people.
And it's not just about individual benefits. India Today also talked about how Starlink could empower small businesses and entrepreneurs in remote areas. Imagine artisans selling their crafts to a global market online, or farmers accessing real-time weather data to improve their crops. It's about connecting people to opportunities they never would have had before.
It sounds like Starlink could really level the playing field, giving everyone a chance to participate in the global economy. But as we discussed earlier, it's not all sunshine and roses. We need to be mindful of the regulatory hurdles, the potential for space debris, the impact on astronomy.
You're absolutely right. As with any powerful technology, there are always trade-offs. The key is to have open and honest conversations about the potential benefits and risks, and to make informed decisions about how we want to shape our future.
So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway message for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to be aware. Now that you understand how Starlink works and the impact it could have, you're better equipped to participate in these important conversations. Think critically about the potential benefits and challenges, ask questions, and share your own perspectives.
It's about taking ownership of the future, right? Technology isn't something that just happens to us. We have a say in how it shapes our world.
Exactly. The future of connectivity is being written right now, and it's up to all of us to ensure it's a future that benefits everyone.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. And to all our listeners out there, keep those minds curious.